Welcome to my repair yard diorama build. Let me start by saying this video sucks, and I don't know why anybody would want to watch this video. The quality is horrible. This is my very earliest projects that I actually recorded to video, and I had an autofocus camera. You can just see it's full of problems. So that aside, let's get into this video and I'll start giving you details of what's going down here. And know that I took care of this very quickly and my quality should continue to grow. So if you stick with me, it should get better on. Right here, what you see me doing is I've already built up the gist of this base, and I know I've done many things wrong, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I just planned out the lean-to that I'm going to put in there. Now I'm masking out the stairs here because I don't want to get a bunch of sand on them, and I'm doing this whole lean-to process right now so that I can get the supports in, then put the sand and gravel down and not cover up the spots where I need them to have a good foothold on the diorama base. So a couple things as you're watching me do this planning out and cutting these uprights and everything. One of those rulers, the one in the forefront, is a scale ruler. It's very handy. It's got various ones have various numbers of scales, but it allows you to have the scale up. So I'm doing this in 1/35 scale, and I'm able to look exactly at it and say, I want an 8-foot 4x4. So this is the balsa or basswood I need to use, and this is how long it's going to have to be. You saw me mark out my cutting mat right there, and now I'm just cutting them off one after another, and I know that I'm getting them to the exact linear foot of the scale that that board would be. Now, of course, they would be set in the ground, so these are quite large, but this is just to, like I said, a placeholder on the base. A couple other things. You'll notice that there's some tracks and footprints in the Sculptamold that I used on this base, but most of that's going to get covered up when I put the actual ground texture. So I'll be putting some more in later on, and you'll see that. The other thing is, you'll notice I did everything square here. Ideally, you should not do a square diorama base, but I had to do that in order to fit the exact dimensions of the shelf that I wanted. Now I've got my posts glued down and quick set in place so that I can go on to the ground texture here. I started out with a little bit of grout. And got that shook up and bust up, and then I just added some actual dirt. And now I'm doing the stocking sift method. Putting the glue down, quickly realized that little paintbrush wasn't going to be anywhere near fast enough, so I went to a bigger paintbrush. I don't always use scenic cement like this stuff. There's absolutely no reason not to. This is good stuff. I just burned through more of it, but I did have this old jar laying around, and I figured it was time to get rid of it. It came in a gift box of diorama supplies that I was given. So just spreading this glue out. Normally I would use a heavy basing glue, Mod Podge, I think is what it's called, or the equivalent. Here I'm sifting out the grout and dirt mixture. Pretty straightforward and simple there. Making sure I got good coverage everywhere. Here I'm making those new footprints like I was saying I would have to do. Putting some tracks back in the ground. My idea for this diorama is that it's a reused repair yard. So those were panther tracks, and now I've got my Tiger 1 that I'm putting on there. So it's got multiple tanks, multiple vehicle tracks in there, lots of guys. And here's my Strabocran that you may or may not have seen me build in my last video. And again, now that I know where everything laid out is going to be at, I'm putting in more footprints. Doing a little bit of cleanup on my dirt and gravel here before I seal it all in with the watered down glue mixture, which is right here. And this is just PVA glue, highly watered down, with maybe a little bit of dish detergent in there. It will help it flow a little bit better. I'm not sure if I have that in here or not. Eventually, your hand gets very tired. As you can see, I'm swapping from left to right all the time. All right. This is the following day when that glue has had time to dry, and I'm removing my temporary posts, and you can see that wonderful spot right there where I wanted them to be. So now we're moving on to painting the buildings, and again, I apologize, the camera angle is just horrible, but you can see I don't use my expensive jars of Vallejo or Army Painter model paints or whatever your preferred brand is. These are the 89-cent Hobby Lobby or Walmart or Michael's or Joann's equivalents. Whatever you have near you, they will all have these. And I don't even invest in the expensive varieties of these so long as I can get the color that I want in the lower priced options. So this is just my simple base color that I'm putting on here, just to get everything kind of, the black was the primer of course, but I wanted to get a base gray. And then this wall I carved in a smaller brick texture. So you see that going on here now, just a brick red. And then I will be picking out individual colors and whatnot on both of these walls. So like I was saying, you don't really want to do a square on diorama, but as you could see when I was laying things out, the tank and the Strabocran are at an angle. The hope is that that will distract from the fact that this is a square base and that folks won't lose attention on the buildings being totally square. Ideally, I would have put these buildings at an angle like I was saying earlier, but so that this would fit in my IKEA glass display case that most of us modelers have, I was limited on height and width and depth. So here, just slapping on that brick red, putting my head in the way. Just did a quick brush rinse. That's my paintbrush basin that I 3D printed, designed and 3D printed for myself. I love it. Here I'm picking out some of these bricks still with various shades of gray, and I'm doing all one shade of gray just so that I'm consistent in my shades a little bit. I don't want to be washing the brush every other brick, obviously, and I don't want to be changing up all my shades of gray by having mixed paint in the brushes. So done with the first shade, going into the second shade. And I've definitely sped up this video, and I've also kind of hurried along some of the footage and steps. I cut out most of them just so you get a general idea for how I was painting that in there. Here's one of the darker shades. One of the other shades that I did, and you can't really pick it up here with this lighting very well, but one of those is actually a greenish gray, which I just loved the way that that turned out. I also apologize for the length of this video. This project here spanned well over a week in the build process between glue drying, paint drying, and everything. But I didn't think any one step of this, the way I filmed it, was enough to justify a single video. And as I said, this is one of my earlier videos where I filmed my entire process, everything I was doing, and it led me to having hours upon hours upon hours of footage, and that just is very hard to then go through and cut down, speed up, crop to what you need, etc. So that's one of the first things I learned. First thing was camera angle. Second thing is hit record when you want to hit record, get the few steps you need, and then stop the recording. It's a lot easier to splice together multiple files than to take one 8-hour Saturday afternoon build session and cut it down into a 15-minute video of anything worthwhile, or worth watching anyways. Yeah, I'm just doing these to save my progress, be able to watch myself grow, and share with my friends and family what I've been working on. I don't expect to get huge or anything. I also make videos for the items that I sell on eBay, but I don't expect to be the next night shift out there or anything. But I do want to make them as entertaining and worthwhile as possible. Here I'm mixing up some various shades of brick red. That one got a bit dark on me. So I went to the other pot. Excellent. And I just pick out some of those bricks. Just like I did the large stones, I picked out some of those bricks. Here is a very crappy pause still frame where you can see those different bricks picked out. And you can also see I've got some bricks that I carved out to make them look like they're missing. And there are some stones on the large wall that are the same way. Here I'm going through and painting the trim. As I was looking at Eastern European buildings, I noticed that most of them, no matter how run down the building itself was, the trim, if it was freshly painted, was usually fairly bright and colorful. If it wasn't freshly painted, then it was pretty well worn, but you could still see that it was bright and colorful. So I decided to go with a yellowish trim and then a very bright door, window, and shutters color that you'll see here in a moment. There's the windows done with the first coat. Here I'm doing the blue for the door, windows, and everything. For the door handle, I used a pin, just a normal sewing fabric pin, or a round-headed push pin. And then for all hinges that are on here, you won't really see them here because nothing's close up enough to do so that you can see them. But I used some 3D printing filament, some scrap that I just cut to the 6-inch size that I wanted and glued in place. Worked really well. Obviously, it's not a working door or shutters, but that's not what I was after. I don't film it, but you will notice later on that I've built window panes and put them in. And then in the final reveal video, which will be coming next of all the components put together, you'll be able to see all of it. So this is wrapping up the paint job of the repair yard base. Just putting some brown on these steps here to bring them back up. And now this is the following day. And I'm just putting a very watered down black coat down here. And I gave the paint a day to cure. As I said, this is the following day. That said, however, when I then re-wetted it and used a paper towel to wipe it down, even though I primed it, even though I gave it a full 24 hours to cure, it still took a lot of that paint off down to the primer level. Now, as I said, it's the cheapest paint I can buy, so that's probably part of it. But the biggest part of it is I forgot a step. What you should do before you do this, or what I do before I do this stage usually, is I'll do a gloss coat, which will protect that first layer of paint, and it'll allow you to wipe this off. And if you do take off anything more, you're taking off the gloss coat and not the actual color of the stones. So I did have to do some touch-up work there. These are some inks, just run-of-the-mill inks that I got from Hobby Lobby. And they are 2 shades of brown and then black. And I'm just trying to make the balsa and basswood look a little bit more weathered. So that's what I'm doing here. The initial ink was too thick to go on the way I wanted, so I'm watering it down considerably to turn it into a wash, and that did exactly what I wanted. Now you also notice I am wearing a glove here, and I'm doing this over a paper towel because it will definitely stain your hands or your workbench or whatever. This is plain raw India ink. It just soaks in. It does not go on the surface. It will not wash off later. In between colors, I'm just doing a quick rinse on the brush. That's what you're seeing every time I go to the brush basin, clear down at the bottom of the screen. And I'm just hitting the different colors. These are the boards that are going to be used in the construction of the lean-to. And I'm not making you watch me do all of them, just going through, hitting them with different colors, different shades, mixing them in, trying to make some wood look like it's relatively new, some wood look like it's very old, intentionally giving some very dark spots to make it look like rusty nail spots, etc. There's going to be some fire damage on this. There's going to be a bunch of other things. And of course, if you've ever looked at wood, the edges soak up more moisture than anything else. So that's why I'm making each edge a little bit darker. Now, I did not know how much wood I was going to need for the entire diorama project, and I definitely didn't use all this, but I knew I would need time for it to dry, so I didn't want to not do enough and have to do some more. So I went through, did a bunch of wood that I didn't need because I know someday I'll use it. Now I'm going through and actually building the lean-to. I'm cutting my posts down to the size that I would want them to be, both what fits nicely on the diorama, obviously, as well as what would structurally make sense if you were building something out of typical dimensional lumber. There's that scale ruler again. And I didn't have any plans for this, so to speak. It's mostly just laying it out, cutting it, doing some sanding to get everything shaped the way I want, and then putting it in place with super glue. I use a wire wrapped around a paintbrush handle as my applicator, and then any little purple thing you see me using here, or that might be pink, I'm not sure. Or sometimes I use a green applicator. Those are disposable brushes that I buy. It's like $3 for 10, and I use them to apply the instant set for the super glue. So right there, that little green thing's just a cheap paintbrush that when it wears out, I can pull off the cotton tip and use it to apply super glue or other glue, or just throw it in the trash if I've got enough of them. Again, just kind of laying this out here, getting things the right angle. Cleaning up my cut. You can definitely see some raw edges on the top of this. I didn't worry about those because they're not going to be visible once I get the structure on the roof. But any raw edge sticking out into the visible area, I definitely touched up with some more ink. And you'll see that step coming up here too. I have in my life built numerous lean-tos like this for storing firewood and whatnot. So while I didn't actually draw up a plan and do this, I have before. Here I'm applying the corrugated metal to the top. I 3D printed on my FDM printer a corrugation machine, which works really cool, really nicely. And then I just cut apart beverage cans. This here is from a Coke Zero, maybe a cherry Coke Zero, I'm not sure. But you can obviously use any metal can. What I did to start with is I cut the sheets to the approximate size that they would be in real life using that scale ruler, and then ran them through the corrugator. Now those are all glued down, and you see me going through and touching up the structure like I was talking about, making sure that all the new cut ends are not looking new cut, making sure that everything looks like it's got the appropriate rust stains, water stains, etc. And just using black ink for that. Watered down, very heavily watered down black ink. Now, nothing will stick to this aluminum can unless you do a good primer coat. So that's what I'm doing here. I could have, of course, chipped down to this, but if you've ever worked with corrugated metal, it rusts for sure, but it's not primed underneath. Its native color is that corrugated metal look. So I did not do this as a chipping layer. I just did this simply as a base to hold the paint. 2 quick coats. And then because I wanted to continue working during this day, I used my airbrush to speed up the drying time. Once that was done, I went in with my steel. These are Vallejo primers and Vallejo paints. I'm very pleased with the Vallejo paint, as well as their gloss, semi-gloss, and flat varnishes. I am not at all impressed with the Vallejo primers. In fact, it is time for me to give up on the Vallejo primers and go to a different priming option, probably a lacquer primer. They're just not heavy duty enough. When you go to chip, and it's not so much on this model, but certainly on the tank model that I built, the Tiger 1 that is part of this diorama, some of the chipping I did took off more paint than I'd hoped, or took it down to the bare plastic because the primer just isn't as strong as a good primer really should be. Now the nice thing is all the primers that you buy from Vallejo, they're like most other companies out there, and you can get them in various colors. So I'll be able to use them as a base paint layer, but I'm going to get a better primer. Here I just masked off so that I don't get pigments up against the building, and I'm going through with some various shades of pigment to represent my rust on the galvanized metal and to dull it down considerably. This is the next day, I believe, so that steel paint had time to dry. So I'm just brushing on the pigments, mixing them where I want them to mix together, and manipulating them a little bit. The light is definitely bleeding it out on that steel paint. It's a very nice steel paint. It's just too bad their primers aren't as good as their paints. This is a shade of green. I did multiple shades of rust, green, and then I even did some just darker metal to just darken down the steel overall and to add just some dust and grime. And this was the fresh rust color that I was wanting on my seams and valleys and edges. The fun part of peeling off the masking tape there, always a nice reveal. Well, hopefully a nice reveal anyways. Here I'm doing some black pigment to represent soot. Obviously this building has been blown up, knocked down, whatever, so I wanted to represent it as if there'd been some fire. And I also did this on the blown up sections of the large building. Here you can see that I've got those window panes put in there as well. And at this point I've also already touched up the blocks on the large building. This is some pigment on the ground to represent the ash that would have fallen outside from the building burning down. And then this is some white pigment. I like mixing it in with the black. I think it makes it look more realistic. Both just as a powder dusting, and then I will also, in some places, mix it to change the effect. Having been a firefighter, I can tell you that I don't think I've ever seen a straight black ash. These are structures, kind of roof trusses that I put in to hold the roof that I put on here. I don't actually show the roof being made. I must not have recorded that, but it will be on there in the final reveal. And I can talk about how I did it at that time. It's pretty simple. I did two different types. I did a shake shingle on the brick building, and then I did a like tile shingle on the other. Here I am putting down just more of my pre-mixed dirt. I wanted it to look like the dirt had been turned up freshly from the tank driving over it, because the large Tiger 1 tank, being a super heavy vehicle, obviously would be churning up the ground. It would not be nice and packed down. So I put that down, and then I use the Tiger again to just make sure I do have the track marks in there. And here is some European earth pigment that I'm just kind of dumping on here, really, just to give it a different tone, because obviously the dirt that I just put on there is the same dirt that's all over the rest of this diorama base, so I don't want it to look the exact same. It needs to look fresher, so this makes it look a little bit darker and fresher. Again, just tamping it down a little bit. And then here I'm misting it with some 99% IPA just to break up the surface tension. And then this is watered down PVA cement again, just like I did for my last step when I was doing the dirt all over the base. But I just put it down so that I can make sure all of it sets in there. And you can see it is quite watered down. When it hit the edge, it just dripped right on down there. And then this is where the Strabocran sets. So I did the same thing. I just put some more down there. Use the Strabocran to go put the tire marks and the jack stand marks down in there. Make sure I'm happy with it and that everything's touching where it should be touching. IPA to temporarily hold it in place, break the surface tension. Watered down PVA glue to seal it the rest of the way in. Thank you for joining me for this video again. I hope that you like it. Subscribe and like if you do. And if you ring the bell, you'll know when I put up other videos. The final reveal for this ought to be coming shortly, and I'll talk about the finishing touches that I did on the base that you just watched me finish the build of, and of course any other details that I think of as I'm doing that slideshow and bringing it together for you. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe and take care.